There is immense value in thought leadership to organizations that's probably undiscovered by many. ROI is extremely high, and it really does serve as thought leadership, that is, serve as the foundation for any really productive or effective marketing program.
What is quality thought leadership? What does that look like? What are the sort of standards and benefits of investing in pushing thought leadership? If we could help folks make better research-driven content very simply, we'd be doing ourselves and everyone else a service.
A key sign to me the thought leadership profession has arrived happened last year when the American Productivity and Quality Center announced the formation of its Global Thought Leadership Institute. I will speak with Cindy Anderson and Lucia Rahilly, both of whom are heavily involved in the Global Thought Leadership Institute. Cindy is Chief Marketing Officer of IBM's thought leadership think tank, the Institute for Business Value. Lucia is at McKinsey, where she is Global Editorial Director and Deputy Publisher. From our discussion, you'll learn about the genesis of the Global Thought Leadership Institute, its plans, the needs it sees in the thought leadership profession, and its plans to fill them, and its February conference in Houston, where I'll facilitate a panel discussion on how to produce compelling thought leadership content quickly. We are going to talk about the Global Thought Leadership Institute out of APQC. You've been involved since the very beginning. So first question is, tell us about the genesis of this organization. Who was involved and how did it happen?
Sure, I can jump in. So my colleague, Anthony Marshall, and I, we both work in the IBM Institute for Business Value together, had done some research on thought leadership and kind of turning that research lens on our own practice, and realized that there is immense value in thought leadership to organizations that's probably undiscovered by many. ROI is extremely high, and it really does serve as thought leadership, that is, serve as the foundation for any really productive or effective marketing program. We also realized that there is a lack of understanding of what thought leadership is. There's no standardized definition. There's no practice standards. There are no certifications. And we saw an opportunity to really look at how we could bring all of those things together and help kind of advance the practice of thought leadership, standardize the practice, and justify the production of thought leadership in a way that was meaningful both to those of us who produce it as well as to the organizations that consume it. So we approached APQC, with whom IBM's had a relationship for many years, and their board was supportive, and we worked through what the details were and launched the GTLI in June with a real powerhouse of a board of advisors. One of those members is Lucia from McKinsey, and we have others from EY, from KPMG, from Accenture, and a representative from academia. So we're in the process of building now, Bob.
Excellent. So Lucia, what did you see in this?
I would probably approach this from a slightly more personal angle, in the sense that when Cindy and Anthony approached me about joining the GTLI board, I thought a lot about a topic that I know is a pet peeve of your own, Bob, and that you've helped us all to address, which is that there is so much mediocre content in the world, and we expect to see even more of that as AI becomes more integrated into the development of content at enormous scale. So it just feels like the world has become like a cacophony of content. It's deafeningly noisy. And as Cindy said, in terms of determining what is quality thought leadership, what does that look like? What are the sort of standards and benefits of investing in pushing thought leadership to a slightly, to a minimum bar of quality, so that it will really deliver on the attention that our audiences invest? If we could help folks make better research-driven content very simply, we'd be doing ourselves and everyone else a service, in my view. So that was a big point for me in joining the board.
It also seems like this is a profession that's just starting to become a profession. Like project management was beginning to come together in the 60s, 1960s, I think. And it's become a very big profession. The Project Management Institute, Cindy, that you know well.
Well, I came from there, was there for almost 13 years and was the CMO for the last 7. So it is the model that we're trying to follow. What was done to professionalize the practice of project management, we think has a lot of application to thought leadership in the niche that we serve as part of the whole marketing mix.
What do you think are the keys to the success, the resounding success of the Project Management Institute that you think are going to be keys to GTLI?
I think community is really important, and getting people, like-minded people, practitioners together, people who do what we do and who love to do what we do, and who are really looking forward to making the practice better. And I think that's probably the number one key, is to get that corpus of people that are really passionate about making it happen. The founder of PMI had an opportunity to spend quite a lot of time with him while I was there, but he would talk about how he never expected this thing to turn into anything. He thought maybe there'd be 1,000 people and they might have a conference or two, and they might professionalize some of the scheduling aspects they had.
The Project Management Institute has a really interesting history. The professional association began in 1969 when Jim Snyder and 4 others went to dinner at a Philadelphia restaurant after months of discussion about the needs of people like them who were managing big projects in their companies. The person Cindy refers to is Jim Snyder, who was PMI's first executive director and is regarded as the father of PMI. Snyder worked at SmithKline Pharmaceuticals in Philadelphia in finance and administration. His founding colleagues were working at McDonnell Douglas Automation and Brown & Root, an engineering and construction firm. Snyder died a year ago at age 85. Today, PMI is one of the largest professional organizations in the U.S., with revenue of $372 million in 2023, up 34% from the prior year, and assets of $561 million.
And I mean, it's just huge. So, I don't know what the scale of thought leadership will be, but, I do know that as a CMO, with the proof that thought leadership is as valuable as it is, every CMO should be interested in having folks who produce quality thought leadership, to Lucia's point, on their team, because it's an important foundation at the top end of that marketing funnel.
Yeah, but there's scarcity, I think, as Lucia pointed out. We both agree. There's a scarcity of compelling content, right? Thought leadership content. And so GTLI is there to raise the bar of quality. So,
and I think to Cindy's point about professional community, I mean, Bob, you've been in this business for decades, yes? And at McKinsey, there's a long tradition of thought leadership, right? We're celebrating now the 60th birthday of the McKinsey Quarterly. And what that means is that for me, 20 years in at McKinsey, I still had a generation of editors ahead of me who had done this work for a long time before I came onto the scene. But not everyone has this benefit. As you said, it's a relatively new profession in most contexts. The value of it is still being realized and recognized in many contexts. And it's difficult, I think, without folks who have done this for a long time. I learned so much from people that you and I both know, these editors who did this for so many years in a difficult context when there wasn't a broad framework for thought leadership, about what good thought leadership looks like, and also about what it can achieve for a business. And I think there's a tremendous meaning to think that other folks who might be trying to start up a thought leadership shop within a smaller organization, or who are within a larger organization that's heavily matrixed and trying to determine how to, pull thought leadership in from all different regions and practices and centralize it and take the best. There's tremendous meaning to think that these folks might be able through GTLI to have this opportunity that like I just stumbled into through whatever, accident of serendipity, of luck, of whatever, even without like the benefits of mentors in place in the organization. It's just a tremendous value, I think, even for us, Cindy, right? To have this community of folks to talk shop with. It's really helpful. That also, I think, has tremendous meaning.
Yeah. When we launched the first conference for thought leadership in 2016, my co-organizer, Jason Malicki, and I said, I don't know how many people are going to show up. We know this is a Lonely Hearts Club, but we don't know how big it is. Here, I am referring to a conference that we ran for 6 years from 2016 to 2022 called Profiting from Thought Leadership. We held the first event in Boston at the Park Plaza Hotel. A couple dozen people attended. By 2022, 6 years later, 65 people attended the event in person at the Laguna Cliffs Marriott in Dana Point, California, and another 65 people attended virtually via Zoom. I think we had 20 people, 25 people show up, and then it grew. But it was the beginning of trying to get these people together at a conference. So GTLI, who's the target audience? Is it the head of thought leadership? What kind of firms? Are they large firms across industries?
Yeah, the GTLI is really starting as we've been saying, Bob, kind of a way to get individuals together to advance the practice, to build standards for the practice, and then, certifications and all. But eventually the target will be from an individual perspective, it would be heads of thought leadership, heads of marketing, CMOs who have thought leadership practices or who really want to advance their thought leadership practice. And then eventually organizations, also we believe that organizations that have thought leadership practices in them will also have an interest in having certified practitioners on their staff, because to the point we keep making, that will ensure that the level of thought leadership that's produced in the organization meets a certain, set of quality standards. It kind of shortcuts the process that Lucia just mentioned of that learning curve, right? So that's, I think, a key factor of GTLI and the audience within it, so that if the practitioners, the people who practice thought leadership, have a certain level of practice standard certification model, and the organizations support that, then it becomes kind of a virtuous cycle, I think.
So in part, this is about creating more supply of people who can do this work, right? Not just the content developing people, writers, editors, ghostwriters, idea developers, researchers, but also the marketing.
Certainly a better trained or standardized body of folks who do this to a set of standards. And it's really, to answer the second part of your question, it's really kind of a very broad look at thought leadership production. So obviously, Lucia and I come from large organizations that have been doing this for a while, but there are many, many, many small organizations that are just getting started. We're seeing a lot of interest in thought leadership in the legal profession, for example. We're seeing a number of construction companies that are interested in building thought leadership practices. So there will be something for everyone in the GTLI. There will be opportunities to participate in the building of the standards, in the building of the certifications, in the building of the communities. And that's kind of the fun part about starting an organization, is it's just completely wide open. Whatever people need, whatever people want to get involved in, the opportunity is there.
I would add there, building on what Cindy said, that we're all coming from different starting points in terms of available resources, right? McKinsey has a data viz team, a visual storytelling team, a team of editors, an audience development team, and so forth. It's a long-standing publishing group. Some of these I know because my husband directs thought leadership at a law firm, that he has to be much more entrepreneurial about how to access resources, how to lean in on data viz, how to use AI, not as kind of AI is becoming table stakes, but he often needs to use AI just to get as much as he needs to get done during the day, not so much to experiment and push the boundaries and try to determine whether, you could use AI to identify new white spaces or to write test or ideas. Just some of the basics within the thought leadership infrastructure, these smaller shops need to figure out how to get that done. So we're all approaching this with different levels of investment, different resources available, different kind of maturity state. We're at different stages of maturity in the process. But I think we all are aspiring for a certain standard that means that attention will not be diluted by thought leadership that doesn't deliver, because that's the quickest way to undermine the credibility of your program and also to kind of dilute across the board. If folks start associating thought leadership with marketing pitches and so forth, it will diminish the appetite of our core audiences to read this kind of research-driven content, right? Our content has to be good because our audience has finite attention.
And they're very sophisticated.
Right.
You can't fool them with BS.
Right.
They know when they're being sold to.
Yeah, or it's a thin argument. It's not really, it's a counterintuitive idea, but you haven't proven it. Have you thought about this issue of how do you get competitors? If GTLI is hugely successful, you're going to have competitors. McKinsey competitors, law firm competitors, IT tech services company competitors, software company competitors. How do you get competitors to reveal best practices?
Charm.
Is that not as big a challenge as I'm thinking it will be?
To me, competition for one is good, right? Like the ideal situation is that the level rises across the board and we all have to produce more and more differentiated thought leadership. That's the ideal outcome of this, even whether or not these best practices are being shared. I think we can't expect our counterparts in other organizations to share like the specifics of their research pipeline or what they're actually going to say. But we're all being disrupted. This would not be 2024 if we didn't have like every conversation anchors on AI and the ways that AI is disrupting X, Y, or Z industry. And the same is true in our industry. So we're all figuring these problems out. And I think at that kind of level of methodology, problem solving, challenges and opportunities, it's pretty easy to get people to talk about what they're encountering and the ways that they're approaching their job. What do you think, Cindy?
Yeah, I agree, Lucia. And I would add that, even if you think about the research that we've all been doing relative to business challenges and solutions and actions, all we're seeing is the advent of being much more open and creating ecosystems that would have never been created in the past. So I think AI probably accelerated that, move toward organizations that were previously completely competitive, now cooperating in ways that they probably didn't even imagine, 2, 3, 4 years ago. So I think applying that same sort of approach to GTLI. Look at the board. There's Accenture and IBM and McKinsey, and we all do the same things in essentially similar space, and yet we've all agreed to come together for the benefit of the people who do what we do and love what we do to make it better. So I think that maybe leading by example would be the first aspect of the charm offensive, right?
Bob, we have a monthly webinar series that we have been producing at GTLI, and we've interviewed folks from these different organizations, and I've moderated a bunch of these, and it's so easy to make the conversation rich and interesting and valuable and novel without getting into the details of like, okay, what's in your research pipeline? What are you coming with then? Like giving away state secrets. I'm going to write down like your piece, your big report on X is going to come January 22nd. So I'm going to get mine out January 20th. Nobody's approaching it that way. It's been pretty easy and rewarding to get folks to open up and talk about what's going on inside their organizations and the way they navigate the challenges and opportunities of the current thought leadership industry.
Yeah, I don't see this as a big issue, but some companies might, whoever has to sign off on membership might say, who else is there? Don't we compete against them? Well, why do we want to reveal our secrets to them? We're pretty good at thought leadership. Why would we help somebody? I mean, I could see some decision makers arriving in that conclusion, which to me is not, really shouldn't be a reason to decline membership.
We didn't see a lot of that at PMI, maybe an initial sort of, I wonder about that. But I think associations by their very nature are designed to be very collaborative and not competitive. So our hope is, of course, that we'll get past that conversation quickly.
What do you hope to be eventually the size of the group, the size, number of members, say by end of 25 and 26? What would be a kind of a thriving community?
Well, if I go back to what I said about the founder of PMI who thought success would be, 1,000 project managers after 10 years or so, I don't know, that sounds pretty good. Lucia, we get 450 people that are signing up for these webinars on a pretty regular basis. So there's a lot of interest, even without a lot of promotion so far, because this is brand new. Don't forget, this just launched in June. So there's been a lot of word of mouth, I think, interest in people who have heard the webinar or have seen something on LinkedIn. I think once we activate on all cylinders, we could grow pretty fast.
I think the other piece of it, Bob, is that what's most important is that the community is relatively engaged and that we can learn from each other and that we can offer each other best practices and counsel about how to approach specific kinds of challenges, what has worked for us in our individual context and how that might translate into a slightly different context. It's interesting. So to me, part of it is like, there's the size element. And obviously engagement, is always going to be a percentage of the total size. So the larger your size is, presumably the more engaged folks you're going to have. But it's really the engagement that makes it worthwhile too.
And do you see membership as being both by individual, like a professional society, like PMI, and or by organization, like a traditional trade association versus a professional?
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that the board and a series of committees of the board will work on over the course of the next several months is to suss out what the membership model looks like. But I would anticipate that there might be membership at the individual and the enterprise level. I don't know. We'll see what the community thinks as we start engaging them and getting feedback and determining what's going to be of the most value to the community. Then we'll build the membership model that way.
What does PMI have? Both corporate member and an individual member, or is it just one or the other?
It's just an individual membership. I mean, there may be corporate bundles, but yeah, they don't have enterprise members.
Yeah.
Or didn't when I was there. They may now.
What was the reason for that?
Because it was really designed to help individuals in the practice. So that if you think about kind of the playing to win framework, the individual was the customer and the enterprise was the consumer. So it was like the needs of the enterprise generated the model of the direct to consumer kind of membership program. That's a decision they made. It's different for, there are, like you said, professional societies versus, individual membership organizations.
Yeah, I think Society for Human Resource Management, SHRM, is the same way, isn't it? It's by individual as opposed to corporate members.
I couldn't answer with any sense of certainty. They may have both. I don't know.
All right, let's talk about the February conference. It looks like a good lineup of people. And what are your expectations for that conference? Is it too early to tell?
We expect absolutely fabulous, stellar things from the conference, Bob. The symposium is, as you said, it's shaping up with a really fantastic lineup, not least of which is to have a conversation with a number of executives at organizations who will talk about the value of thought leadership as consumers of it, which I think is an interesting perspective that we don't often think about within, the production side. What is the value that the consumers, that the people we're writing for, or producing for, get out of the thought leadership? So to hear from them directly, I think is going to be really interesting and unique for the attendees. We'll talk about, begin kind of determine where we go with the definition of thought leadership, with the standardization of the work that we do. We'll have a few focus groups on what those standards might look like. Presentations on, there's a few on AI. There's a few presentations on the ROI of thought leadership based on some research that Anthony and I had done as well. So just a lot of variety for both large organizations like McKinsey and IBM and others that have been doing this for a long time, and to Lucia's point, have a lot of resources, but also for those smaller organizations that are really looking to build their practice and their program. I think it's going to be valuable for both ends of the spectrum and everyone in between.
Yeah, it feels to me like the agenda, to Cindy's point, really offers something for all of us because it's pulling through the value chain. Forgive the corporate jargon, but it's end to end, right through that value chain for thought leadership, right? We're going to talk about why. What's the why of thought leadership? What's the value proposition? Why is it a vital investment? As Cindy said, how do you maximize ROI on the content you develop? How do you sell it to leadership? How do you get that leadership perspective? Cindy mentioned the leadership panel. What is the leadership perspective on thought leadership? What is the frontline perspective on what's most valuable as you're bringing thought leadership to market, and the kind of resonance and engagement that it activates, right? We're going to talk about the what of thought leadership. How do you develop quality, research-driven content at a juncture when scale is pivotal for many organizations? Everybody's focusing, rightly or wrongly, on scale. And in many cases, such as McKinsey, we're actually having to pull back and take a fewer, bigger, better approach. So, how do you juggle what might appear to be competing demands for quality on the one hand and for agility and scale on the other? And then we're going to talk about the how. And as Cindy said, specifically this big, disruptive, the Taylor Swift of topics. Actually, maybe Taylor Swift is a little bit out now. I don't know what the new metaphor is for AI, but how is AI transforming the way that thought leadership is conceived, the way it's developed, the way it's disseminated, and so forth? So we're really going to pull straight through and address these fundamental topics that are relevant for stakeholders in all different contexts for developing thought leadership.
Do you expect to see across industries overrepresentation at the event from management consulting and tech services firms, and underrepresentation by other sectors? What sectors do you think are going to kind of glom onto this most in the beginning?
That's an interesting question. If I look at the registrations for the webinar series that Lucia's been hosting over the last several months, many of those registrations are not from management consulting and tech services firms. They're smaller organizations. They're thought leadership consulting folks. They're people, I think, who are hungry for the kind of community that we've been talking about. So will we see an overrepresentation? I don't know. I kind of don't think so, Bob. I think it's going to be a little bit more broadly representative of people who do thought leadership across types of organizations and functions.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think part of that question speaks to the maturity issue. Professional services firms, at least in the consulting field, because consulting primarily traffics in ideas, tend to be far more advanced in maturity on the thought leadership journey. Banks, law firms are part of professional services. but because they're selling very sort of, tax, contracts, very practical services, less focused on ideas, and it's less their currency than it is for a management consultancy. So I think on the one hand, the people whom we all know, because many of us have been in the consulting industry, because that was an early adopter of thought leadership. We know a lot of folks in that business who have gone on to, the amazing Jeff Pundyke at Deloitte, Jocelyn Simpson at Heidrick. Like, we know folks who have spread out over the professional services field and led thought leadership programs at different professional services organizations. But the need for thought leadership has just spread out over all these different sectors, right? Banks, as Cindy said, construction firms, everybody's doing it now. PE, all these places. So I would expect that we'll have stakeholders that want and need different things who arrive. The professional services folks may be far more advanced along their journey, and they want to, find out what McKinsey is doing, what BCG is doing, and what Accenture is doing, what IBM is doing, and so forth. Others want to get something rolling and really understand what are best practices. What resourcing do I need to set up best practices? How do I sell thought leadership to my own leadership? Because this is, it's a cost center. How do you get leadership to really see the value of developing this kind of material and getting it into the marketplace and so forth? So I agree. I'm not sure it will be an overrepresentation from professional services, other than that, like, everyone we know will ask to go, and we know those folks already. I do think it will sprawl out over different sectors.
So if certain firms showed up and they're not kind of on anybody's radar screen in terms of thought leadership, if they showed up at the event, which ones would they be when you realize we've arrived?
That's a good question. I don't know that I have an answer for that. Lucia, do you?
So I just want to make sure I understand the question, Bob. You're saying, like, if Abercrombie and Fitch shows up or something, like something that, seems completely implausible. That's a great question. I've been to a large industry conference the past couple of years, and I've had many conversations with energetic, lovely, intelligent, curious people who are trying to make thought leadership work for their organizations. And I'll ask, so where do you actually work? And they'll say, like, Bob Buday's flower shop in Erie, Pennsylvania. And I'm just absolutely flabbergasted. Like, it speaks so powerfully to the evolution of thought leadership in the marketplace that folks from these small B2C organizations are engaging in this kind of work. But tell us what organizations you have in mind that would mean that we have made it.
That you have arrived. I have 4. And these are not tiny companies. These are not Bob's Flower Shop in Erie, Pennsylvania, although I lived in Pennsylvania for many years.
Did you have a flower shop?
No. I had a neighbor who used to own one, but he found it was not a very profitable business.
That's because he didn't engage in thought leadership.
That's it. I'll tell him today, this afternoon.
Reopen that opportunity.
Here's why you failed. Okay. The 4 are Walmart, which recently advertised for a head of thought leadership in their e-commerce advertising business. Andreessen Horowitz, big venture capital firm. They do a lot of thought leadership stuff.
They do a lot of thought leadership stuff.
Third is Spotify. Spotify had a head of thought leadership. I think she recently went to Netflix in the last year or so. And the 4th is Amazon Web Services. They're looking for thought leadership people. I think if you can get those 4 companies at your event, we will all know that thought leadership has fully arrived.
And why these 4?
Because they're not management consulting, number 1. They're not tech services, number 2. And is AWS a household brand? Well, Amazon certainly is, but AWS may not be. They're household brands. They're companies that you wouldn't figure. Thought leadership? Them? Why? But once you begin to understand their challenges in communicating to other businesses why they should do business with them. They need to be seen as leading experts in their domains. Then it begins to make sense. I want to thank you too for getting on our show, and I look forward to seeing you both in February in Houston. And it's a great place to be in February, not in July, but in February. I wish you great success with GTLI.
Thanks, Bob. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Bob. Look forward to seeing you live there. And everyone else, come on down.
Live and in color.
Open to all.
If you enjoyed this episode, we'd love it if you left a like and if you shared the episode with your colleagues. Everything Thought Leadership is a video and podcast series from Buday TLP. It's for thought leaders and thought leadership professionals, the people who help experts get recognized as thought leaders. You can find out more about Buday Thought Leadership Partners at budaytlp.com.